Years ago, I assumed America was stuck with welfare as we know it. But then Charles Murray wrote Losing Ground, explaining how welfare perpetuates poverty. And a few years later, Bill Clinton said America would
end welfare as we know it.
And now Charles Murray's written a new book, By the People, Rebuilding Liberty Without Permission. It encourages Americans to disobey some of all those rules. Really, just don't obey them?
Just ignore them. And what we have to do is make it possible for people to ignore them without the government being able to come after them. And that can be done.
How?
I want a defense fund. I want it to operate like legal aid, which now helps poor defendants. I want it to be on the behalf of the ordinary American, not the big corporations. And here's what I have in mind. You have some small business person who's being harassed by a bureaucrat and threatening him with the fine. I want somebody to materialize and say, we're taking this man's case. We are going to litigate it to the max. You are going to be sorry you ever got into this, and if at the end of this you find him guilty and he has to pay a fine, we're going to reimburse it.
And if that happens, eventually government will say, maybe we ought to pick and choose and not have so many of these rules because they can't enforce all of them all the time?
I want the government to have a no harm, no foul regulatory approach. You know, in sports, you could call a foul in every NBA game every time they come down the court, but they don't. If it doesn't affect the play, they let it go. Well, why don't we do that with regulations? If nobody's been harmed, if it doesn't bother anybody, why enforce these
It always
stupid
bothers somebody. Somebody thinks somebody might get hurt.
Oh, John, you have so many regulations that are so obviously stupid, and that actually has to be the criterion for which regulations you can ignore. I am not saying just don't pay any attention to anything. I believe that you ought to have strong tunnels in coal mines and you ought to keep people away from whirring buzzsaws. That's fine. But when you have regulations which say you need a railing to be 42 inches high, and if it's only 40 inches high, we're going to fine you, an overwhelming majority of Americans hearing about that would say, that's really stupid. The government should get out.
And these boxes are filled with these rules. It's hard to get people alarmed because you're being pecked to death by ducks. They're always little boring things. On TV, I make feeble attempts to show how the rules strangle us. I trap myself in spider webs of rules. Gotten bystanders to wrap me in red tape in front of Congress. Taken a chainsaw to piles of rules. I'm not as clever as they are in Hollywood. The producers of this movie gradually suffocate Robert De Niro in paperwork. He's an engineer who didn't register his business. This is how it works in real life if you do anything that makes bureaucrats nervous. But the bureaucrats keep producing more. It's their job.
Yeah, and there's nothing to stop them because Congress can write a law which says, give us clean air. Well, how do you define clean? That's all left up to the regulatory agencies to do as they see fit. And there's no stopping point.
And the regulator feels he's not doing his job if he doesn't add something to make the air a little cleaner.
When you can't measure output, you measure input. And that's what happens with regulations. You keep writing more and more. So here's the idea. You take a careful look at a lot of these. You pick and choose. And you have systematic civil disobedience in which you have rules that ordinary Americans will agree are really dumb. And it doesn't have to be along partisan lines. Ones that people across a wide variety of political views will agree are dumb. And you ignore those.
This year, thousands of parents are breaking the rules by resisting the standardized tests that schools want their kids to take. They just tell their kids, skip the exams.
155,000 New York students boycotting, close to half of students opting out.
Good idea?
That's a terrific idea. I wish I'd thought of it when my children were being harassed by tests. I'll tell you another form of civil disobedience. The last time you were on an interstate with a 65-mile-per-hour speed limit, what was the flow of traffic? About 72 miles an hour. That's civil disobedience. And you know what the state troopers do? They don't arrest everybody who's going 66 miles an hour because they know they can't. They have to restrict themselves to people who are actually creating a driving hazard or going way, way, way over the speed limit.
But you say don't do it for taxes. We all complain about complex taxes.
Yeah, because taxes first is a legitimate function of government. There's no question about that. We may not like the income tax code, but we did have a constitutional amendment authorizing it. And the main thing, John, is systematic civil disobedience with the tax code is indistinguishable from cheating on your taxes.
Yeah, I always think they just don't want to pay.
Yeah.
Want to
Whereas
pay
you can have systematic civil disobedience with other things where obviously it's a matter of principle.
And Rebuilding America Without Permission proposes some rich guys establish something called the Madison Fund to pay for this. Why Madison?
I chose Madison because he was the man who more than any other midwifed the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. It's the right name, I think, for the man who gave us the limited government that we all love.
You make the point in the book that Japan and Germany thrived after World War II because they were blown to smithereens and all of their rules were knocked away?
Yeah, this is a man named Mansur Olson, an economist who first said that what happens to governments after a period of time is they become sclerotic. They become rigid, unresponsive, and that's what's happened to government now. And one of the points I try to make in the book is we aren't going to fix this through the political process. You said it in the introduction yourself. There is no way to get Congress to roll back the regulatory state. The only way to do it is for us to take matters into our own hands.
Thank you, Charles Murray, and thank you for writing your earlier book, In Pursuit of Happiness and Good Government. When I was just learning about liberty, that book really opened my brain.